Mental health is such a buzzword nowadays. It's like, it's very popular to talk about now.
Sometimes the most healing thing that you can do is just walk with a person.
I'm sure you're probably wondering, Chad, did you go to Harvard? I absolutely did go to Harvard, but I didn't attend school there. I just went there and I just came back with this lousy shirt.
Yeah. Welcome back, you guys. This is the Up Close podcast, vlogcast, wherever you're tuning in from. We are your host. I'm Tori. This is my hubby.
I'm Chad, the hubby.
The hubby. And yeah, we just want to talk about topics that a lot of people don't talk about, or at least we feel like aren't talked about enough. And so today we're really going to touch on mental health. But before we get into that, and our special guest who is absolutely incredible, we've been having a blast with her behind the scenes. We just want to give you a little bit of up close just with us and our week and what's been going on. Oh, y'all, we just got back from New York and it was amazing. It was very, very chilly. And unfortunately, my hubby's immune system just
It broke down.
Couldn't deal.
It broke down. I feel like Job right now, with my face breaking out in boils. Is that too Christian-y? First off, can I just say you're so good at that? Everything you just did, I love that. You just like nailed it.
Thanks,
I get
babe.
so nervous for intros and I'm like, oh my goodness, like she's crushing it right now. I don't know if the camera saw me smiling. I was trying not to make her laugh, but I'm like, my wife, y'all.
You're cute, babe.
So yes, unfortunately, my immune system broke down the last few days. I just got terribly sick, and my wife had to put up with me and how miserable I am when I'm sick. And I broke out with cold sores, and we chose to not cover it with makeup because on this topic, we're going to be talking about mental health and insecurities or anxiety or depression, whatever it may be for you and me. It's something I really struggle with. I really struggle with an image issue where, you know, if you know what I do for work, I model for a living. That's what I do.
He gets paid for that pretty face.
And so it really affects my mental health. It really affects the way I feel about myself. And it doesn't matter what my wife says about me or what my friends say about me or even my mom. Shout out to my mom. You know, it's what I say about myself. And I've realized the past 3 days while I've had these on my lips, it's really shown the way I talk to myself, which is, honestly, I'm so glad you're here. Because this is more of a counseling session for me. And I'm just excited to kind of unpack so many different topics for people that maybe are struggling with something similar, or there are different things that are going on inside their heads that they don't want people to know about, or they want to disguise. Because I typically wall myself off whenever I have these, you know, like I don't want to go on castings. I don't want my agents to know. I don't want to show up for podcasts. It really does affect who I am as a person and who I am in Christ because of these. And so I just want to, this is a step for me to beat that and to say, you know, like, okay, God, it is what it is. And I'm not going to try to disguise it, and let's roll. And okay.
Well, babe, I love that because we want to introduce our guest in just a second, but I even, you know, if you don't know, I used to deal with severe cystic acne. And I opened up about it on my Instagram and my YouTube. But once I had conquered it or whatever, and I look back and I'm like, I wish so badly I would have been talking about it like he wanted me to when I was struggling with it, because there's so many other girls and guys where it completely like takes over your mental space. I mean, I'd cry myself to sleep and be so depressed about it. And it's so funny how just something so what may seem superficial, how it can really affect your mental health. So on that, we are going to introduce our lovely guest. This is Miss Brittney Moses. She is studying psychology at UCLA. She has a podcast, a blog, a website that's amazing. We were checking that out. I'm like, yes, girl. She has online resources, and she is a mama bear, aka she's just killing it in the whole life game, and has great advice on just practical ways that mental health affects our daily life, but also like the intersection of that mental health with faith. And
I got the first question. I don't know why it hasn't even hit me this far, but Okay, I think the one thing that is better than all the designations you have and all the research you have is your passion for this topic of mental health and mental illness.
I never would have imagined myself doing this if you would have asked me 7 years ago. I was really committed to serving in youth ministry and serving with churches and different church plants. And I also, at the time, had started kind of a nonprofit for youth and young adults for leadership outreach leadership development and community outreach. And so was gathering teams together, was coordinating with, because we had representatives in different states and things like that.
Love that.
So was dealing with youth kind of collectively, just serving, like newly came to Christ, was on fire. And one of the obstacles that I kept running into time and time again, which I didn't foresee, were mental health challenges. You know, there were constant issues of depression, even those living with a disability that I didn't totally understand, a lot of anxiety, and even some of those who are struggling with holding on to their lives, you know. And so
Wait, so someone's holding on to their life?
like they were contemplating just not living anymore. Yeah. And so this continued to be an obstacle, both in my nonprofit and what I was seeing at church. Kind of one of the bigger light bulb moments that I had was when I was serving with a church in Dallas, Texas. It was a new church plant, and they stuck me in with the youth. And, you know, the lead pastor at the time came up to me and shared with me that, you know, there was this mom and dad, they were distressed because their son was having, you know, struggling with depression, and he was having suicidal ideation. But this time they found a gun in his room. And it was just kind of like,
It got real.
it got real. Brittney, why don't you go talk to the family? And
No pressure.
no pressure.
Oh gosh.
This was before I was studying psychology or had done any training or anything like this.
Yeah.
And me just being, you know, serving, I prayed with the family and whatnot, but it really showed me, okay, we have no idea what to do when it comes to these crises. I think that some churches are getting better about having some resources in place, but it still is kind of a gap in what to do with these more serious mental crises. And so I just remember after that, I was just like, there's more going on here. You know, there's something else going on here. I don't fully understand all the dynamics. And I would go to the library and rent out like every book I could find on ministry and mental health and the psyche. And I was taking notes like as if I was in a class.
And you were the teacher.
And I was my own teacher, yes. Yeah, and so that was before I ended up deciding to go back to school for it, but I found a passion there just kind of in the natural world of doing ministry, and that it was reoccurring. You know, you'd have people who came to Christ and who were born again and whatnot, and even were given, you know, leadership positions, but you saw these issues coming up over and over again behaviorally or being blockaded. They had a hard time fully knowing God and knowing yourself. Any one of us who's probably struggled with any mental health challenges, it's hard to see clearly. You know, it's just hard to see clearly. And so I was like, okay, this is an obstacle not only to functionality just in life, but to their faith. And so I kind of say, like, I feel like I'm in the ministry of like talking people off the ledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Man, that's heavy.
No, and I love that you're talking about it in the church, because there's so much, I hate to say the word, actually I don't hate to say it, Christianese, you know, and it's so cringy. And these people are dealing with real stuff, and I feel like a lot of Christians, they're not well equipped to know how to handle what, you know, just how you said, you walked into that room and you didn't feel equipped to handle that family. And how do we, you know, because I get questions on Instagram all the time from girls, and sometimes I don't feel equipped to answer their questions, or I'm not a counselor. You know, I don't have a PhD, I don't have a doctorate, like I don't study psychology. All I can do is be a listening ear and point them in the right direction. But at the same time, it's like, what can we do other than say, well, have you prayed about it? Like, what are like signs? What should I do in that situation when, you know, a young girl or just a young person in general says like, hey, I'm dealing with X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I definitely think as believers, we have to give ourselves permission to not be the expert on all things.
Right? Well, I mean, I mean, like, let's be real here.
With his Harvard shirt on,
I'm sure you're probably wondering, Chad, did you go to Harvard? I absolutely did go to Harvard, but I didn't attend school there. I just went there, and I just came back with this lousy shirt.
Yeah.
There you go. But yeah, just we get the savior syndrome, where it's like we want to be the end of their healing process. We want to have the answer that's going to be that root point of healing, and it's actually prideful. It's actually prideful.
I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. When I say a lot of people, I mean me. Is that I definitely have that savior complex, but I mask it as in I want the best for that person. It's I don't think other believers are walking around saying, "Oh, I'm the Jesus in their life. I need to save them." Right. But there may be a guilt problem about why they're maybe crossing boundaries to love that person in a space that they don't maybe belong. And so I think that there could be different reasons that we kind of mask as to why we do cross lines to go help people, but it's hard because we don't always see it. We can be blinded by it. We're definitely not just walking through like, oh, I'm the savior in this. But we still do cross that line. I'm
so glad you said that, because I think that one is definitely just a lack of boundaries. But also two, I think that a lot of people just are not comfortable with sitting long enough with other people's discomfort. I think that a lot of times we just don't do well with discomfort. And a lot of times because we haven't sat with our own discomfort and dealt with it. And so we want to give people these quick fixes and these quick answers because it's easier to do than to actually sit with someone and be like, you know what? This is hard. Like, I don't have the answers for all of this.
I need to do that more with my wife.
But I'm here for you, and I'm willing to walk with you. Let's look at some resources, and I'm willing to walk that path with you. I think that's much more humble. I think it's also safer when you're thinking about all these dynamics that are involved. And so we don't have to have the answers for all things. There are people who are specifically trained for this and to know all of these dynamics. And sometimes the most healing thing that you can do is just walk with a person.
So just kind of going backwards a little bit, I know that mental health is such a buzzword nowadays. It's like, it's very popular to talk about now, which, shout out. That's why we're, just kidding. We're not. It's like, and so it's something that we want to have a greater conversation with, but we also want it to be applicable to our audience in a way that like it really impacts them. They walk away and thinking, oh man, like, oh, I see where my mental health was being affected there. It's not always, if it's not depression, it could be anxiety. If it's not anxiety, it could be burnout. If it's not burnout, it could be suicidal thoughts. If it's not that, it could be so many different things. So can you unpack a little bit about what mental health encompasses? No pressure.
No pressure. No, I think that's a really good point because it's such an abstract idea, and you just say, take care of your mental health, and it's like,
Thanks.
What is that? What does that even mean? So I think that we can safely say like your mental state, right? And I think that what helps, I think, to illustrate it is seeing mental health like physical health. I think that's because it's more concrete. So we all have physical health. We all have mental health, right? And it's all on a spectrum. So when you're, thriving, you're usually having, your social relationships are thriving, you are able to usually kind of cope with life stressors because we're always going to have life stressors, right? But you're able to cope through those. And so it's on a spectrum. Now, when you're experiencing, for example, anxiety or depression, I like to compare it to, say, like a cold, right? Like you may have a cold and it's kind of episodic and it comes up and it kind of goes away after a while with just a little bit of treatment. So you might have depression or anxiety that's just kind of episodic. It shows up in your life, maybe due to any number amount of like circumstances
or triggers
that are triggering that. And then there are mental conditions that are more like diabetes, right? Where it's something that's maybe diagnosable and that that person might need continued maintenance for their whole life, but it is manageable. Sometimes it's preventable, and there are treatments available so that a person could live a functioning life. So I think that if we can see it in the same way that we see physical health, because they are connected, that kind of helps. So for me, if I'm just, in situations in my life where I just felt like I was drowning mentally, you know, I would compare it to, I'm in the ICU. Right. You know what I mean? Right now, mentally, I'm in the ICU and I need a lifeline.
It's so interesting just to parallel, you know, a physical circumstance to like a mental well-being, you know, and it's a great like picture or metaphor for people to even just think about it. Like, oh wow, like if I'm sick, I go to a doctor, you know, for the most part, especially if there's a greater injury or sickness.
Exactly.
And so until people start to see their mental health that way and see it as something that can actually either be cured or be treated over time through recovery and healing and all that stuff, it's hard because a lot of people, you know, it's the whole thoughts and prayers, you know what I mean? My thoughts and prayers are with you. It's like, it's great, but there's also a lot of maybe physical, tangible things we can do to still walk in that in a direction towards mental well-being.
Kind of like what you said off camera. You're like, well, I'm going to pray on the way to the doctor.
Pray on the way to the doctor.
You know, like I'm going to continually pray because that's what I'm called to do, like to be in continuous communication with God. And I think the cool thing that just kind of came to my head is like, God's not unaware of the fact that you're struggling mentally. You know, like
he's not surprised.
He's there in your, like he's with you, and he knows that like, hey, there's resources that I've made available to you. Yeah, and you're not utilizing them.
Yes.
Yeah, and
it's a good,
and I feel like that's how God is sometimes with us. You know, He's given us these gifts. He's given us these resources.
Right.
And we're like, it's fine. I'm fine. I don't need it.
Right.
Right. And God's like, no, I've given you all of these things that are gonna benefit you.
Yes.
And there's so much, like there's a stigma around going to quote unquote therapy. You know, like how do we get past that? Like there's no stigma about going to the doctor when you're sick.
Right.
Physically, but there's a stigma around going to a therapist when you're mentally unwell.
I think it's because, that's a really great point. I think it's because we've seen the mind as this existential place for so long. And the truth is that the brain is an organ, right? And the brain plays a role in our mood and behavior. So, you know, obviously thoughts and prayers are great. God can work anything, but like you said, He's also given us all these gifts. And when it comes to our physical health, you know, we don't hesitate to tell someone to go to the doctor, get an assessment, get it checked out. You're having these symptoms, you might want to check it out. Same thing with mental health, because something that I like to advocate is that we are bio, psycho, social, spiritual beings. And all of these things make up the whole being, and all of these things play a role in your mental health. So, you know, you have biological, right? So you have all your neurons and brain chemicals that play a role in mood, right? And then you
Is that
hormones,
the dopamines and
all of that,
serotonins,
the
all that
the
stuff,
serotonins,
all the chemical releases,
all the chemicals, right? And then you have your psychological, which is kind of your thought patterns. And a lot of our thought patterns are shaped by experience, what we've been through. You know, this especially plays a role if someone's experienced trauma, right? That's going to rewire the way that they view the world. And then we're social beings. We are created to be social, so if you're living in isolation, if you're withdrawing, that's going to play a role. You know, and then we're spiritual. So what do we truly believe at the core when our faith is being tested in those moments? So all of those things are playing a role, and those things don't have to do with a person's faith. That's literally something that's going on within their body, and you need someone to assess for that. So.
And I loved what you said earlier. I'm sorry, I did not mean to cut you off.
Totally
but
fine.
When we were chatting, you said something really important. If you aren't well versed in the topic, but someone comes to you, to ask the right questions, you know, and not just say, I'll be praying for you, or you should pray about it. But how do we actually be that listening ear and ask them the right questions that gets them thinking, so that they have that personal assessment of, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm a little bit off on the spectrum, or a little different than I thought I was. Maybe I should actually go see someone.
No, the everyday person doesn't have a checklist there. But some, I think, key questions you can ask, you know, it's like, you know, how long have you been feeling this way, right? Because if a person has been feeling depressed or anxious for, say, more than 6 weeks, that's persistent, and that's kind of a red flag for something that's more serious and might need treating versus something that kind of might be just a week that's just sadness.
And this is off the basis that someone comes up to you and is like, hey, I've been feeling kind of bad.
Or it comes up in conversation.
I see.
And they're like, you know what, I haven't been able to sleep. I've just been feeling really down. Maybe I've been feeling shame and alone. And, you know, how long has this been going on? You know, and typically if they've been feeling that way more days than not, then that can be a clear sign that, okay, this is more serious. This hasn't just been a week or 2 weeks. This is something that's persistent. And that would be like a key indicator to say, you know, have you talked to anyone, or do you have anyone that you can talk to about this? You know, I'm sorry you're feeling this way. I'm here for you. Let's maybe see. I was going to go back to meet people where they are, right? I mean, you obviously can't force anyone to disclose or share anything that they don't want to. But I think exactly what you said is the right place to be in is, you know what, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a therapist, because that takes off that mantle of I need to fix this person, I need to have all the answers for this person. And that's when you get into the dismissive responses, right? Where it's just like, oh, well, you know, have you walked outside lately? You know what I mean? Or have you...
I heard a really bad one to say is to say, oh yeah, whenever I went through that.
Right, or to like cast it back onto yourself.
Yeah,
so I
make
think
it about you.
Yeah, just focusing on the person and, you know, hey, do you want to talk about it? You know, what's going on? And if you do have a close relationship with that person enough, sometimes you can kind of accountably highlight, you know, things that they're doing better to encourage, like, oh, I see that, you know, you got a blog out there, that's awesome. Or I see that you've been working out, that's been cool. Like encouraging the wins, because usually your mind is kind of tainted toward this negative tunnel vision. So that's a great way.
I actually loved your blog post about, I think it was 10 ways you're doing better than you think you are, or something like that.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, because the struggle bus is real, and you always feel like you're just under the current and you're not doing anything right. So I did do that kind of blog with positively affirming, like, hey, this is the signs that we're still moving along, you know.
Love that.
So yeah, just meeting people where they are, you know, letting them know that you are an open ear, being non-judgmental, where it's like, hey, there is grace for you no matter where you are, and I hear you, you know, and even if you've never been there, it's like, look, I've never been there. I can't imagine like what that must feel like. Like, I'm here if you want to share a bit more about what that's been like for you, and let others take the lead on what they're feeling. Or sometimes I ask, because I get a lot of people who are like, I'm struggling with this, or I'm having a crying episode today or whatnot. I will ask them, you know, I'm so sorry you're having a rough day. What usually helps you? That's what I'll ask them, like, what usually helps you during this, or what usually helps you in these moments, and just helping them recall their own natural common sense kind of resources that help them, you know, instead of telling them, you need to do this, or you should try this. Have you tried that? You know, it's like, what usually, I'm curious, like, what usually helps you in these moments? And they usually have their go-to, especially if there's someone who does have a therapist or is living with a condition. They probably have some coping skills or things that they've learned in therapy. And so if you can redirect them to that, it's like, it's shared wisdom. You have to be the one with all the answers, and you're letting them take the lead. Even in a therapeutic relationship with a therapist, it's not supposed to be me telling you what to do with your life. We're a team, and we're working together on
figuring it out together.
What works best for you.
Well, I love that, and we just want to thank you for coming. I feel like we could talk about this
forever,
like days on end.
We haven't even gotten started on
love
CBT.
You guys.
Cognitive behavior therapy, cognitive Bible therapy.
Cognitive Bible therapy.
There it is.
The real CBT.
There it is. Well, we want to. Yes, y'all do that. But before we close off, I just want to give you the floor. If you have anything going on, if you want to tell the viewers or listeners.
Plug.
Plug. Here it is. Here's the floor.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, if you go to my blog, BrittneyMoses.com, that's kind of where I house all of my content information, from the podcast to articles to like what else? Sometimes I do printables, like mental health trackers and things.
I love that.
I just make things for myself and my own mental health, and like I wonder if this will help somebody else.
Yeah. I saw there's an app and there's a
There's an
blog
app.
and there's a podcast.
There's a podcast.
Yeah.
So I have the Faith and Mental Wellness podcast, which is exactly what it sounds like. We're integrating faith and mental health, and it's really cool because I've opened it up to where I have people with both lived experience, those who are living with the diagnosis or have experienced these mental conditions, and professionals, those who are researchers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and even I have a biochemist on there that talks about the relationship between nutrition and mental health, and just kind of destigmatizing, covering the whole person, and have a very conversational kind of psychoeducation for anyone who wants to listen.
Well, we just want to thank our listeners and our viewers for tuning in to this episode of Up Close.
Like and subscribe.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and we hope that you have the best day ever.
The best day ever.